Hello and welcome to Rajya Sabha Television. You're watching a brand new edition of India's World with me, Frank Razan Pereira. Prime Minister Narendra Modi and his Japanese counterpart Shinzo Abe on Monday reviewed the evolving security scenario in the Indo-Pacific and agreed to further bolster bilateral cooperation in third countries for peace, prosperity and development in the region. The two leaders held a meeting on the sidelines of the East Asia Summit in Bangkok, during which China's fast expanding military and economic expansionism in the Indo-Pacific region figured prominently. The Ministry of External Affairs said that the two leaders also deliberated on the inaugural 2+2 Indo-Japan Foreign and Defence Ministerial Dialogue later this month in India, noting that it will help provide impetus to the security and defence cooperation between the two sides. On this edition of India's World, we will analyse the bilateral relations between India and Japan. Joining me on the program today are S.R. Tayal, former ambassador, Hitli Basu, Associate Fellow, Institute for Defence Studies and Analysis, and Harshvi Pant, Head Strategic Studies, Observer Research Foundation. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of India's World. Ambassador, I'd like to begin the program with you. First, let's try and analyse and understand the status of the bilateral relationship between India and Japan.
I would put it in the context of this 2+2 meeting at the minister level. I think both Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Prime Minister Shinzo Abe are very conscious of what is going on in Indo-Pacific, how the equations are changing, how new challenges are coming up, and realizing that last October when they met, they had resolved in the joint vision statement that the 2+2 dialogue was there earlier also at Vice Minister level since about 2010, Foreign Secretary, Defence Secretary at our side, that it should be raised to Minister level. And really what is happening is under Prime Minister Shinzo Abe that the self-defence forces have their self-imposed restrictions on how they operate, what is the geographical reach of their operations, the Japanese self-defence forces. But gradually, incrementally, Prime Minister Shinzo Abe's guidance, that scope is being enhanced, is being increased. And the latest challenge which has come is because of President Donald Trump's policies of burden sharing, cost sharing, and now United States is no longer dependent on the oil from the Gulf. Whereas countries like India and Japan, Korea, we are so much dependent on oil from the Gulf. So ultimately, perhaps in the future, India, Japan, some other countries will have to work together to secure the oil from the Gulf and what happens in Iran if there is some conflict. So there are very new challenges which have come up, and that is perhaps the background of this directive which came from the two prime ministers, that the 2+2 should meet, the two defence ministers and external affairs ministers should meet before they meet for their annual summit, perhaps before the end of the year. So I would put it in that context, that how India and Japan work together in a strategic atmosphere in Indian Ocean, in the Gulf, and also in the neighborhood, in for instance Sri Lanka, for instance Myanmar, for instance Maldives, because we have to occupy that space, otherwise China will occupy that space. India has very goodwill, India has a lot of historic relations, connectivities, but we lack money. And China is coming with huge amounts of money, as all of our viewers know, and it is only with the help of Japan perhaps that we can give an alternative, give a better alternative to our neighbors, including in Sri Lanka.
All right. Ashpan, talking about the 2+2 dialogue, let's talk about the other 2+2 dialogue. We saw it running into some kind of trouble, had to be postponed on several occasions with the US. But from Japan's perspective, what is it that we can expect when we have the inaugural 2+2?
I think what this 2+2 dialogue like 2+2 does is it signifies two things. One, it signifies that we are at a stage now where both Tokyo and New Delhi are looking at this relationship from a holistic perspective. It doesn't make sense to have a foreign policy and a defense dialogue being conducted separately, and because the relationships are so intertwined, engagement is so intertwined that it makes sense to look at the relationship in totality. And I think the fact that this is our second dialogue of its kind with the nation, it also signifies how the positive trajectory on which Indo-Japanese relationship has been moving for quite some time now. So clearly there is a sense of comfort in each other, which I think is relatively rare in international relations, and it's also at this pivotal point where, as was being outlined, so much is happening around Japan, around India, in the geographies that we are located, that it makes sense for us to have this dialogue, more or less, a dialogue that encompasses our foreign policy and security priorities together, and also help perhaps in redefining some of the priorities that are set by the leadership, because this will be I think after that will be followed by our annual summit between the two leaders. So it will be very important for the two ministers, defense and foreign ministers of both countries, to lay out that roadmap, which then can be operationalized. At this point, the relationship is largely driven by the prime ministers. It's a personality-driven relationship. 2+2 institutionalizes that relationship in a very fundamental manner. So if you have this consultation every year annually, then it means that the two bureaucracies are in sync with each other, and two very important bureaucracies, foreign policy and defense bureaucracies. And I think the kind of relationship that both the prime ministers envision for India and Japan, envision the kind of geopolitical remapping that they envision for Indo-Pacific, it's critical that the bureaucracies are aligned in a manner that perhaps this institutionalization would allow them to do. And going forward, as you look at some of the critical aspects of this relationship which have been outlined but are still being operationalized, so whether you have the connectivity projects that India and Japan are involved in, whether you have third-party projects that again, whether in the neighborhood or elsewhere that India and Japan are involved in, this dialogue would be very instrumental in giving concrete shape to them, because a lot of the times what we see and what we visualize in a relationship like India and Japan is that some of the conversations have become never-ending. For example, the amphibious aircraft, the thing that we have been discussing now for so many years, it is yet to reach fruition. I think the bullet train project is also moving very, very gradually. So there are a number of projects which are very important for both these countries. But because I think it is now reliant solely on the prime ministers, I think the institutionalization of this kind allows some of the burden to be given to the bureaucracies to resolve them and to operationalize them in a speedier manner. So I more or less I think it underscores a lot of the positives that the ambassador was talking about, in the sense of where the relationship is going, and perhaps also lay out a roadmap in operationalizing some of those very, very positive opportunities that exist for Delhi and Tokyo.
Absolutely. And talking from a defense point of view, Titli Basu, what is the level of cooperation between India and Japan, and where do you see it going?
Well, defense cooperation between India and Japan is a very important component of our overarching special strategic and global partnership that we have conceived with the Japanese and elevated it in a couple of years ago. And we have seen considerable progress. If you see from 2008, when we actually started the security cooperation, defining it in within the framework of the bilateral relationship, from there we have come a long way. If you look at 2015, we have till about 2015, our focus was mostly on joint exercises, a lot of exchange between the armed forces of the two countries, so on and so forth. We have a very well-defined institutionalized framework at the defense level. You can see the defense ministerial dialogue, the annual national security advisors dialogue, and so on and so forth. And annual, not only the Malabar exercises, which get a lot of attention, but we do have GEMIX, we do have the annual exercises at the between the Indian Army and the ground self-defense forces of the Japanese. We just finished it, the second round of our exercises in Mizoram. They have also participated now in the COPE India that we are having, and not just in terms of bilateral and the Malabar exercises. I think before the Malabar in July of this year, all the three countries, India, US and Japan, have have the navies have participated in mine surface exercises, I think, in northern Japan. So there is a lot of cooperation that is happening. But since 2015, I would say that the qualitative depth of the relationship has increased. We have seen two fundamental key agreements getting signed. One is on the defense, the agreement on defense technology and equipment cooperation, which again is supported by the agreement on protection of classified military information. But having said that, if we first look at the policy part of it, if you look at Japan's internal security policy, the trajectory that they are kind of embarking on right now, India has emerged as a critical anchor in their Indo-Pacific strategy, in their own defense and security, discussion and conversation in Tokyo. For example, if you look at their maiden national security strategy in 2013, it does talk about developing a very robust cooperation with India, particularly in terms of joint exercises and maritime exercises, followed by, if you look at all the consecutive national defense program guidelines, we just had the recent one in December 2018. It also outlines India's role, and also if you look at the annual defense white papers, so India consistently features in their national policy discourse. It's not just symbolism that they are, it's beyond when they are developing a network style security architecture to deal with the challenges and tap the opportunities in Indo-Pacific. So India is very much persistent in their idea of the Indo-Pacific, beyond the bilateral exercises, if we look at high-end technology cooperation, I would say that if we look at India's, when it comes to high-end technology cooperation, it's a very complicated domain. So we do see a lot of push from the Japanese business lobbies. If you look at the Keida and Rin policy papers that are emerging, or even the national, after 2014 when they eased the arms exports ban, Japan had a self-imposed arms export ban for a very long time. And when they eased it under, the scheme of, policies that Shinzo Abe has unfolded, we see that India, they are tapping into Indian market. They are interested in Indian market, the business lobbies. We have instituted certain forums, for example, India-Japan Defense Forum. We do have joint working groups between the two countries. But high-end technology cooperation entails a very, it's very complicated in terms of cost. There are the main issues of technology transfer, creating jobs within the Make in India program, and also because they conceive arms export within their own concept of a proactive contribution to peace. So even though Japan is a repository of dual-use technology, they are a manufacturing giant in terms of civilian technology, and there is a lot of dual-use technology that we can tap. Right. But we have been navigating the terrain of where there is markets like cost-sensitive markets like India, and when we are pursuing Make in India program, so US too has not. It has taken longer than anticipated. We have a MOU that we signed earlier during I think with the Mahindras in 2018. But we have not seen considerable progress after that. We were expecting probably some movement when defense dialogue happened earlier this year. But having said that, we are taking small steps also in terms of co-development, joint production of technology. The DRDO and ATLA are working together in the domain of robotics and unmanned ground vehicles and so on and so forth. So right now probably, and we have actually invited the Japanese to participate in our submarine programs, and we have not really received the kind of response we were expecting.
So far more complexities there.
Of course, and especially with their experience in the Australian submarine deal. So they are also new to the global competitive market of arms trade.
Sure.
So we should focus more on joint development of smaller projects, probably, instead of focusing on big ticket items right away. Right. So that will, define the future of our defense and security cooperation.
Absolutely.